In the year 1592, the Korean nation stood at the edge of the abyss. A massive and experienced Japanese army, fresh from a century of civil wars, was sweeping across the peninsula with unstoppable ferocity, leaving a trail of burned cities and desperation. On land, defeat seemed inevitable, but the fate of Korea would not be decided in its fields and mountains, but on the sea. There, a defiant admiral, with a small but revolutionary fleet, stood as the last hope of a nation. This man was not preparing for a simple naval battle. He was preparing to conduct a symphony of destruction, a naval trap so precise, elegant, and lethal that it would go down in history as a masterpiece of the art of war. The legend of Admiral Yi Sun-sin at the Battle of Hansan Island is that of a victory forged in the mind before it was forged on the sea. He annihilated the formidable Japanese fleet because he categorically refused to fight on the enemy's terms. With the clarity of genius, he identified the fundamental weakness hidden behind the Japanese strength: their obsession with boarding and hand-to-hand combat, a tactic inherited from their land wars. Yi transformed that very obsession into the weapon of their own destruction. Through a perfect psychological bait and the flawless execution of his crane wing formation, he lured his arrogant adversaries into a naval slaughterhouse of his own choosing, an aquatic amphitheater for their systematic annihilation from a distance. This is the epic of a naval David who, with a sling made of cannons and innovation, faced the Goliath of the samurai. It is the story of how superior technology, rigorous training, and above all, an impeccable strategy can overcome brute force and numerical superiority. The Battle of Hansan Island was not a chaotic clash of ships, but a deadly dance choreographed by a master. Yi Sun-sin taught the world that the greatest naval battle is not the one won with the most ships, but the one won with the most brilliant idea, proving that elegance and lethality can be, in the hands of a genius, one and the same. In command of Korea's hope stood Admiral Yi Sun-sin, a figure who seemed carved from granite. He was a masterful strategist, a quiet man, meticulous in detail, and incorruptible in an age of courtly intrigue. Though facing overwhelming numerical disadvantage in the war, he possessed an unshakable confidence not in numbers, but in his tools and his people. His faith lay in the superior technology of his ships, in the exhaustive training of his crews, and above all, in his astonishing ability to anticipate the movements and psychology of his enemy. His cause was not glory, but the very survival of Korea, and for that, he knew he must sever the arteries that fed the Japanese invasion, its naval supply lines. Yi's arsenal was as innovative as his mind. His fleet of approximately 56 vessels was composed of the powerful Panoxion, true floating fortresses. These warships, with multiple decks, sturdy pine hulls, and a flat bottom that gave them incredible stability, were superior artillery platforms, bristling with cannons. And among them sailed his secret weapons, the Geobuxion, or turtle ships. Covered with a spiked iron-plated roof, they were history's first ironclads, designed to ram and sow chaos in the enemy lines, immune to boarding attempts. Yi's fleet was not large, but it was ship for ship, the most advanced in the world at the time. Facing him, the giant was Wakisaka Yasuharu, one of Japan's most aggressive and renowned naval commanders. He was an impetuous, arrogant man with an insatiable thirst for personal glory, eager to be the one to finally destroy Yi Sun-sin, whose growing reputation was already a thorn in the side of Japanese pride. Wakisaka commanded a larger fleet of 73 ships. His main vessels were the imposing Atakabune and the swift Sekibune, lighter and faster ships packed with samurai, the world's deadliest warriors in hand-to-hand combat. Wakisaka's strength lay in the ferocity and individual skill of his men, but the great strength of the Japanese Navy was, ironically, its fatal weakness. Its naval doctrine was a simple extension of land warfare. Their ships were not true warships, but glorified troop transports, designed with a single tactical purpose: to quickly close with the enemy, grapple them, and board them to slaughter the crew in samurai combat. This obsession with boarding meant their artillery was sparse and of inferior quality, and their ships, built with lighter cedar wood to maximize speed, were tragically vulnerable to heavy cannon fire. Wakisaka was coming to fight with swords. Yi was waiting for him with an arsenal of gunpowder. The stage for this naval masterpiece was carefully selected by Yi Sun-sin. Wakisaka's Japanese fleet was anchored in the narrow and dangerous Gyeonaeryang Strait, a place of treacherous waters and limited room for maneuver. Yi, with his intimate knowledge of the coastal geography, knew that fighting there would be a mistake. The true battlefield, the stage he had chosen for his performance, would be the open sea off Hansen Island. It was a vast expanse of water, the perfect place to execute the elegant and deadly encirclement maneuver he had perfected in his mind. He was not going to attack the enemy's fortress. He was going to make the enemy abandon its fortress and willingly enter his slaughterhouse. Yi's plan was one of brilliant simplicity, a gambit based entirely on the psychology of his opponent. Instead of launching a massive frontal assault, he sent a small detachment of just 6 of his Panoxion to provoke Wakisaka. This small group's mission was to feign an attack, appear weak, and at the crucial moment, execute a feigned retreat. The goal was to ignite the fuse of Wakisaka's arrogance, to convince him that the Koreans were cowards, and to lure him into a furious pursuit into the open waters, where the rest of Yi's fleet lay hidden in silence, awaiting the signal. The trap was set. If you want to see how a genius turns his enemy's arrogance into the instrument of his own annihilation, subscribe and activate notifications, because the crane is about to spread its wings. The play began at dawn. Yi's small squadron of 6 Panoxion sailed towards the entrance of the Gyeonaeryang Strait and launched a series of bold provocations against the anchored Japanese fleet. They fired a few long-range cannon volleys and then veered away, as if hesitant to engage in serious combat. For Wakisaka Yasuharu, watching from his flagship, the scene was a confirmation of everything he believed. The Koreans were few and fearful. The opportunity to win a glorious victory and crush the troublesome Admiral Yi once and for all was being served to him on a silver platter. Arrogance clouded his tactical judgment, like a bull charging a red cape. Wakisaka took the bait with blind fury. Without bothering to conduct proper reconnaissance or consider the possible consequences, he ordered his entire fleet of 73 ships to set sail immediately and pursue the retreating Korean vessels. Yi's bait had worked beyond his wildest expectations. The trap had not only been sprung, but the enemy was rushing towards it with suicidal enthusiasm, rowing at full strength to hunt down what they believed was easy, cowardly prey. The predator had, unknowingly, become the prey. In their frantic and disorganized pursuit, the Japanese fleet lost all tactical cohesion. The faster, lighter ships, driven by the bloodlust of their captains, surged ahead, while the larger and heavier command vessels fell behind. Their formation stretched into a long, vulnerable line, a serpent of ships venturing ever deeper into the open sea, exactly to the location Yi had predetermined. Every stroke of their oars brought them closer to the center of the Korean Admiral's stage, a stage prepared not for a battle, but for a methodical execution. The 6 Korean ships continued their feigned retreat, guiding the disordered Japanese fleet to the precise point behind Hansen Island. The moment the lead Japanese ship rounded the tip of the island, its crew froze. What they saw was not the empty sea they expected, but the main body of the Korean fleet. Over 50 ships saw it waiting for them in an ominous and deadly silence. And then, in that instant of revelation and horror for the Japanese, Yi Sun-sin gave the signal. The trap was about to close with terrifying elegance. Yi's main fleet, which had been hidden from view, emerged in a perfectly synchronized and choreographed movement. Instead of a conventional battle line, the Korean ships fanned out to the sides, pivoting with astonishing precision to form a massive, U-shaped concave formation, the legendary Hakik-jin, or crane wing formation. The Japanese ships, which moments before were chasing a small prey, suddenly found themselves sailing directly into the center of an arc of death, a naval embrace from which there was no escape. The crane had opened its wings to trap the serpent. The do-or-die moment had transformed into a certainty of annihilation. The Japanese fleet, caught within the curve of the Korean formation, was exposed to a devastating crossfire from the front and both flanks. The Panoxion, acting as stable artillery platforms, unleashed a storm of cannon fire upon the Japanese ships. The heavy Korean cannonballs shattered the lighter cedar hulls of the enemy vessels, turning their decks into a hell of splinters, smokes, and screams. The elegant formation had revealed itself as a naval meat grinder. Any desperate attempt by the Japanese ships to do the only thing they knew how to do, advance to board, was met with a concentrated hail of fire. Ships trying to break the center of the formation were met by frontal fire, while those trying to escape through the sides were annihilated by the ships on the wings of the crane. The turtle ships plunged into the center of the melee, ramming and firing in all directions, sowing panic and preventing any attempt at organization by the Japanese. They were trapped, outgunned, and being systematically dismantled. The battle became a one-sided slaughter. The tactical, technological, and training superiority of the Korean fleet was overwhelming. Yi Sun-sin did not need his men to draw their swords. His cannons did all the work. He watched the destruction from his flagship, conducting the battle not as a combatant, but as a conductor controlling every section of his deadly symphony. Wakisaka's fleet was systematically sunk, captured, or set ablaze, ship by ship, in one of the most crushing displays of naval superiority in history. Wakisaka's arrogance had turned to humiliation and despair. Trapped in the center of the slaughter, he watched his powerful fleet being reduced to floating wreckage. The tactic that had brought him glory in Japan, the aggressive charge and boarding, had become utterly useless against an enemy who refused to play that game. Yi Sun-sin had not simply won a battle. He had refuted the entire Japanese naval philosophy in a single afternoon, demonstrating the supremacy of standoff firepower over close-quarters bravery. Finally, the firing ceased. The sea was covered with the smoking remains of the Japanese fleet. The trap had closed, and the prey had been annihilated. The crane wing formation, which had opened so gracefully, had closed with brutal finality. The victory was not just tactical, it was intellectual. Yi had entered his opponent's mind, anticipated his reaction, and built a perfect trap around that prediction. The elegance of his plan was matched only by the brutality of its result. The collapse of the Japanese fleet was total. The blind pursuit had led them to a calculated annihilation. Yi's genius was not just in devising the trap, but in having the discipline and trust in his men to execute it perfectly. Every Korean captain knew his role, every rower knew when to act. It was the victory of a system, of a mind that had transformed an underdog fleet into the deadliest naval force on the planet. The Battle of Hansen Island was over, and the legend of Admiral Yi Sun-sin had just become immortal. The beauty of Yi's maneuver lay in its conceptual simplicity and its executional complexity. Lure, trap, annihilate. 3 steps that, when performed with a master's precision, can change the course of a war. The graceful curve of the crane wing was not just a formation. It was the physical manifestation of a superior idea, an idea that saved a nation and redefined warfare at sea forever. The unassuming Admiral had proven that the mind is the most powerful weapon of all. The battle's statistics reveal one of the most lopsided victories in naval history. It was a near-perfect victory, an annihilation achieved with chilling efficiency. Of the 73 ships that composed Wakisaka Yasuharu's fleet, 47 were sunk, and another 12 were captured by the Koreans. Only 14 ships, including the flagship of a humbled Wakisaka, managed to escape the carnage and flee to tell the tale. In stark and astonishing contrast, the Korean losses were practically nil. Not a single ship was lost, and only a few sailors were recorded as wounded. Yi Sun-sin had destroyed a superior enemy fleet without sacrificing almost any of his own. The fate of the defeated commander, Wakisaka Yasuharu, was humiliation. He managed to escape with his life, but his reputation and his pride were shattered. The defeat was so complete and so shocking that it sent a shockwave through the entire Japanese high command. The confidence they had in their naval superiority evaporated in a single afternoon. The news of the annihilation at Hansen Island sowed doubt and fear, and the Japanese commanders became suddenly reluctant to face Yi's fleet in open water, a Yi Sun-sin sickness that would paralyze their naval operations. For Yi Sun-sin, the victory was a quiet confirmation of his methods. There were no grand celebrations or boastful speeches. For the stoic Admiral, it was simply the successful execution of a meticulously prepared plan. The victory gave him almost absolute control over the southern waters of Korea, allowing him to operate with impunity and continue his critical mission. The battle not only saved his fleet from an imminent threat, but also solidified his position as the only effective shield protecting Korea from being completely swallowed by the tide of the Japanese invasion. The most important strategic consequence of the Battle of Hansen Island was the paralysis of the Japanese offensive. Yi's brilliant victory effectively severed the supply and reinforcement lines that the massive Japanese land force desperately needed. The samurai armies, which until that moment had advanced almost unopposed across the peninsula, suddenly found themselves isolated, short of food, ammunition, and reinforcements. The Japanese invasion, which had seemed like an unstoppable force of nature, ground to a halt. Yi's victory at sea gave Korea a vital breathing space, the time needed for its land armies to reorganize and for aid from Ming China to arrive. The battle solidified the legend of Admiral Yi Sun-sin, elevating him to the pantheon of the greatest naval commanders in world history. Alongside names like Nelson and Themistocles, his innovative use of technology, his development of sophisticated naval tactics, and above all, his strategic genius, became subjects of study for future generations. The crane wing formation was immortalized as a timeless example of tactical brilliance, a perfect demonstration of how to use deception, geography, and a superior formation to annihilate a numerically superior enemy. For Korea, the Battle of Hansan Island became a moment of immense national pride, one of Yi Sun-sin's 3 great victories during the Imjin War. In one of the darkest periods of its history, when annihilation seemed certain, the figure of Yi and his naval victories became an undying symbol of resistance, ingenuity, and patriotism. His story became a foundational myth, the tale of the hero who, against all odds, saved his nation through his intellect and his unshakable courage. The echo of Yi's victory resonates even in the history of his adversary. The defeat at Hansan and Yi's subsequent victories forced the Japanese to completely reevaluate their naval doctrine. The humiliation suffered at the hands of the Korean cannons was a brutal lesson in the limitations of their boarding-based tactics. Although the change was not immediate, the experience in Korea planted the seeds for future naval reforms in Japan, proving that a crushing defeat can be, in the long run, as powerful a teacher as a victory. Yi's elegant trap not only saved Korea, but also taught its enemies a lesson they would never forget. There is a detail that reveals the true nature of the man behind the legend. In his famous war diary, the Nanjung Ilgi, a national treasure of Korea, Yi Sun-sin does not gloat over his crushing victory. There are no words of self-congratulation or poetic descriptions of the enemy's annihilation. His entry for the day of the Battle of Hansan Island is characteristically quiet, factual and concise. He simply lists the enemy ships destroyed, those captured, and the enemy heads that were taken, as if completing an inventory report. This serenity in the face of such a monumental triumph is the key to understanding his genius. For Admiral Yi, victory was not a source of personal glory or a reason for boasting. It was simply the fulfillment of duty. It was the logical result of meticulous preparation, rigorous training, and superior strategy. The most elegant battle in naval history was, for its architect, simply a job well done. His legacy is not only that of a brilliant strategist, but of a leader who found greatness not in the celebration of victory, but in the quiet, determined pursuit of perfection in service to his nation.